Hey moms and dads, this video is for you if you have an infant at home that is struggling with milestones. Maybe it's rolling, sitting, crawling, walking, or if you have a little bit older child and they're struggling with speech. Maybe it's coordination, fine motor, gross motor. What I want to share with you today is how those things should be developing optimally, and if they're not, what you can do as a parent to help your kiddo out. My name is Dr. Ty. I own Whole Family Chiropractic, and one of the things that we're really passionate about in our office is helping your kiddos' brain and nervous system, their brain-body connection, develop the way it's supposed to in a healthy, natural, normal manner. And one of the things that we see in our office is kiddos struggling with milestones. It's often because of a stress in their nervous system that's preventing their body from developing symmetrically, from developing good movement of their muscles, and that sequence of events that are so important for your kiddo, not only in the short term for knowing that they need to learn how to sit, they need to learn how to crawl and walk, but for the long term, because what we know is those milestones, when certain things happen in the brain, it sets the brain up for success later in life. It sets the brain up for learning how to track with their eyes and read. It allows the brain to feel comfortable sitting in class to learn. So there's some very critical things that happen early in your kiddo's life that we want to make sure we're supporting their body in developing through their childhood. So what I want to start with then is why these things might get thrown off in the first place. And a lot of kiddos out there, they're born, they're learning how to bring their hands to their mouth, they're learning how to crunch, they're on their tummy, they're looking up, and they do okay. They start rolling to one side, they roll to the other side, it happens evenly. Pretty soon, next thing you know, they're pushing themselves up, they're working their way into a seated position. They're starting to rev a little bit. They're starting to creep forward and crawl. And finally, they pull themselves up and they start walking. Now, if your kiddo's not having that normal sequence of development, one of the things that can be throwing them off, and the thing that we see most common in our office, is from the birth process. We know that birth is a very stressful time for your baby. And depending on how things go, it can be more or less stressful for different kids and be one of the reasons why some kids just accelerate through these things and some kids have a more difficult time. For my own son, when he was born, we had a long labor. It was over 30 hours. And when he came through finally, the bones in his head were extremely overlapped. He had a broken collarbone, and it took a lot of work to get his body back on track. And I know as a parent myself that wanting my kiddo not only to feel good, but their brain to develop optimally is one of the top priorities. So what can happen, especially the neck, is one of the most vulnerable areas during the birth process. If something's out of alignment there, two things happen. One is it causes their body to favor one direction over another. You might see your kiddo when they're a baby, or maybe they still are a baby, they tend to turn their head one way over another. If you put them in the car seat, they're always looking one direction. When they fall asleep at night, their heads always turn one way. If that's the case, guess what's going to happen when they start learning how to roll? Which way are they going to roll first? Well, of course, the direction that's easier to turn. If they try going the other way, their brain is not going to feel comfortable with that, and it's not going to be able to make that shift the way it's supposed to. And now if they start rolling one direction, eventually they'll figure out the other way, but that side now starts to get imprinted into their brain and their nervous system, and that's something that now sets up the next stage to favor moving in one direction over another. The other thing that happens, if something's out of alignment in the spine, the brain doesn't like that feeling, so it tends to send more stress into the brain, which can also slow things down developmentally. And one of the things that we love seeing with kiddos is often when they get adjusted, they start sleeping a lot more deeper. They're more content with their parents. They're more content through the day because we're putting some calm input into the brain, not only to calm their brain, but to set their brain up to now keep working on that development and those milestones. As we get a little bit older in life, if there is stress going into the brain, sometimes it starts to disorganize the brain. And that's where we might see a delay with things like speech or things like coordination, the fine motor, the gross motor, as I mentioned before. The brain foundationally is going to always work to get your kiddo up and moving around, moving upright against gravity before it starts working on those next level things. So your kiddo's brain is going to want to roll, sit, crawl, get up, walk, and then say, okay, now that I get this walking thing down, now I'm going to start spending more energy talking and engaging with the world. First, your kiddo, their physical body needs to be able to move and interact with the world. Then they're going to want to start to expand into that social interaction as a next level. So what we look for in our office then to see if there's stress on the nervous system, we have a set of scans that we do. I'm going to show you those here. These scans help us measure to see if there is a clear connection between the brain and the body, or if something is out of alignment, if it's causing stress on the nervous system. And I'm going to explain why this is important and how it compares to things like PT or OT. A lot of kiddos in our office, they do a combination of chiropractic, the neurological focus that we do, as well as those other things. I want to share with you the difference in the order to do those things, but also want to share with you then what we're looking for are these stresses. So this is a scan of a 1-year-old girl. When she came into our office, she was not yet sitting. So at a year old, she had gotten really good at rolling, and she had figured out how to crawl and move either by rolling across the floor, or she would be on her back and she would use her head and she would grip and pull herself along the floor with the back of her head. So clearly she was developing some of these compensation patterns that I mentioned before. So when we did her scans, what we found is that there was a lot of stress in her neck. You can see what we're looking for here. The white bars are ideal. We have mild is green, moderate is blue, red is severe. If there's any stress on those nerves. So clearly there's a lot going on up top here. This big twist was from her birth process. So sometimes we'll see if the birth is stalled, if there's a suction, or if baby gets stuck partway through and needs to be helped out. That can cause a lot of extra stress on the neck. Or sometimes if the birth even goes really quickly, we'll a lot of times see this lower part of the neck get extra stress if baby's like pushed through really fast, because it's a lot of pressure. It's 60 pounds, 70, 80, 90 pounds of pressure on baby's head as they're being pushed through the birth canal. So if that happens really fast, that can be stressful as well. So ultimately, when we saw this little girl's scans, we knew the main reason she wasn't progressing was because all this stress was in her body. She had been doing PT for the previous 6 months coming to see us, and parents felt that she was kind of stalled. She wasn't really getting anywhere. And obviously, if she still was, the only way she could crawl was with the back of her head, she still wasn't sitting, we needed to help get her body back on track. So when we started adjusting her, as we started clearing these areas out and freeing up this part of the nervous system, some of the early things parents noticed was that their daughter was becoming more comfortable in her body. They used to, when they'd pick her up, her whole body would be rigid and stiff because that tension, when one area is off, the brain says, all right, I don't feel comfortable. I'm going to protect, I'm going to guard, and I'm going to make the whole body rigid. As we started adjusting her, she started being a lot more fluid in her body. We noticed that when she was in the office, and her parents noticed it at home. Mom said after one of her adjustments one day, she started grabbing her foot, I wish I could do that, and bring it up to her mouth like little babies do and should be able to do, but she hadn't been able to do that yet because of the tension in her body. So once we started freeing things up, all of a sudden she was grabbing her feet, bringing them to her mouth, and that started to create a lot more flexibility in her spine and in her limbs. Shortly after that, Mom and Dad said, yep, now she's rolling, she's starting to get up. She's actually putting weight on her hands and her knees, which she hadn't done before. When we go back to the scans here, this twist, these nerves here, go across the shoulders, down the arms into the hands, and the nerves in the low back here, where there's another twist, those are the nerves that go down the legs. So when those nerves were compromised, her muscles couldn't be as strong as they were supposed to be, and her body didn't want to try being up on all fours. And the good news, as we continued with care, she now, mom comes in one day and she's like, guess what? She was rolling and she got herself into sitting all by herself. And what we really love doing is seeing kiddos get into those positions, like from rolling to sitting on their own, because that tells us their muscles are developing in a strong enough way and their brain is able to coordinate that movement, because if it can coordinate it on its own, it's telling you that their core, their limbs, their neck, their head, everything's ready to do that movement. And as a result, now their brain's going to be coordinated enough to do the next movement and the next movement. And it's going to allow the brain to really understand the subtleties of the body so it continues with optimal development. Now, as I jump ahead here, this was her first progress scan. So you can see we still have some work to do, especially in that neck. But to go from all this stress to only this much, we knew that we were making really big gains. And that's one of the reasons that she could progress and get through that plateau that she was stuck in. Now, once we started clearing things out, now mom and dad they were talking to the PT, and the PT's like, wow, she's actually really progressing through some areas that were stuck before. So they then decided to go back and up their PT. They had been spacing things out because they weren't seeing much for the progress they wanted. But as we freed things up on the nerve level, now they could go back to PT and make more progress. So I want to explain why that is. And as I mentioned before, when parents have the question of do we do PT, OT, chiropractic, or all three, what we do in our office is a neurological approach. So rather than the twisting, turning, popping, cracking that most people think of with chiropractic, we're working directly with the nervous system. So it's very gentle, and it's going to allow the brain to help take advantage of other things like OT and PT. So most people think chiropractic is popping, cracking the bones. But we know the bones don't move by themselves. It's the muscles that tell the bones what to do. So if your muscle's tight and you try adjusting the bone, what do you think happens? Either one, it's really tough to adjust, or two, you get the same adjustment every time because the muscle just pulls it right back. So this tends to be where something like PT lands, is they do stretching and strengthening, helping to retrain the muscles to get things in better alignment. However, we know the muscles are controlled by the brain and the nervous system. The brain sends messages down. The nerves tell the muscles to be tight or to be relaxed. If you've ever had a stressful day and you feel that tension creeping in your body, it's because your brain is telling your muscles, I'm stressed out right now. When we look at those scans, I'll bring those back here for you to see, you can clearly see in this 1-year-old little girl's case that there was a lot of stress on her nervous system. So if PT tried to work on the muscles, when there was that much stress on the nervous system, she wasn't going to make progress. Once we could open up the nerve channels, get things better connected, working the way they were supposed to, now she started to see advances in PT. So we've seen this with other kids, older kids. Like one kid we had, he couldn't write a 3 in class. Once he started getting adjusted, all of a sudden he had the coordination to be able to do that. Same kiddo, when he would go to OT, there'd be this playground that he would play along the bottom and not have the coordination to want to climb up it at all. Once we started getting him adjusted, even though he'd been going to OT for quite a while, now suddenly he started climbing up. So what we find is that the neurological chiropractic frees the brain, opens up the connections between the brain and the body, and allows changes to start taking place. Then when you bring your kiddo to something else, like PT and OT, now when they're working on different exercise and different motions, their nervous system is going to be set up to be able to learn those things much more quickly. So if you have any questions on this, please reach out. One of the things we love to do is to be able to help your kiddo get off to a good foot and make sure that they are developing optimally, because when you lay these foundations of good milestones early on in childhood, it really sets their brain up for success later in life.